In this video, we're going to be talking about the Dyn8 signal processor that we have included on the dLive. It's one of the most powerful new tools that we have. It's a combination of a multi-band compressor and a dynamic EQ. The dLive can have up to 64 different Dyn8s inserted on different channels. By default, they'll be set up on insert A on pretty much all of our band and speaking channels. So make sure that your channel is selected, and then you want to make sure that you go to INS-A or insert A tab on the channel. If a Dyn8 has been assigned, it will appear on the processing screen. Unlike before, this is not considered an effects unit, so you won't be able to go to your effects screen on your setup screen and see any of them. As I mentioned before, the Dyn8 is composed of a multi-band compressor and a dynamic EQ, each with 4 bands. The multi-band compressor is very similar to the old dLive multi-band compressor, mostly with just visual updates. You can adjust the slope between your bands with this tab in the bottom left-hand corner, and the crossover points between the bands using either your finger or the assignable knob. Just like before, the ratio, threshold, and timing controls are all handled below the unit using the assignable knob to adjust any particular parameter by selecting it and then moving the assignable knob. You can also set the external sidechain input over with this box here. Drop-down menu gives you all of your options. You can then indicate whether each band is using the internal or external source with the self or external toggle on the left-hand side of each box. Next to that, there's a split wide toggle that will change the input signal the band uses for the band's compression. Split means the band will only trigger on the signals coming through the frequencies that the band is acting on. Wide means that it will trigger off of the entire signal. Quick for instance to explain that is, let's say that I have a tom that I want to do a slow attack top end compression on to reduce high rings after the initial hit on the tom. I could set the high mid band in an area that I like, but then set it to wide so that the full spectrum triggers it, making it much less likely that cymbals or other bleed will trigger the high mid band on my tom, since I can trigger it off of the full range of the tom mic. On the left-hand side, we have the ins and outs for each band to enable or disable them. There's also a link button that links all of the parameters that you selected across all 4 bands. There's also a relative button that will keep a particular offset that you have decided or that you have made on a particular band, but move them all together. There's also a hard-soft knee toggle, a sidechain source selector as mentioned before, and finally the timing controls. Multiple auto modes are available, as well as peak and RMS that can give you adjustable values. And we also have the Dyn EQ4. This is a dynamic EQ, again with sidechain features built in. There are 2 important functions that are done on the graph. Both frequency selection, by dragging your finger across, and gain, which is done with the assignable knob. By default, gain is assigned to the knob and frequency to touch. However, you can change this and make frequency assigned to the knob with this toggle over here. You will notice that the band shows an outline for wherever it is set. However, if the band is acting, you will see a filled-in version indicating what the band is actually doing. In the band parameters box, you can set width, which also includes shelf options for the top and bottom band, if you just turn it all the way to the left. A toggle switch to indicate whether you want to go above or below your threshold for the trigger. the same self and split buttons that we saw on the multiband compressor, which serve the same functions. And you'll also see an option on the bottom for standard or fast response. This is an extremely versatile tool between the two of them, and we will continue to learn them and adapt them to our style and our room.